I'm very blessed today to be able to speak to Morel, who was the Ducks of Macrob last year with a perfect 99.95 and also did exceptionally well on the UCAT, scoring 2,450, which got her interviews and a place at Monash Medicine. And she's now in her first year of university and here to share her experiences on what year 12 was like, what the UCAT was like, and now what medicine is like. So, Morel, thanks again for joining me and for sharing some of your insights to the people who are going through this journey. For the people who are watching, can you share a bit about yourself and what experiences made you who you are today?
Yeah, for sure. Hey everyone. My name is Murray and I graduated from Macrob last year and I'm currently a first year medical student at Monash, which I think is a really grateful experience for myself. I guess not so much the experiences that made me who I am, but the people. I feel like I'm really blessed to have my family, my friends, and special shout out to my dog who is there next to me a lot in year 12.
Yeah, and what did you always feel supported in your journey, or were there times where it was additionally like very overwhelming and stressful? And if so, how did you manage that?
Yeah, for sure. I think like being in year 12, you kind of have to deal with a lot of different things at school and at home because life doesn't really stop outside of school. And so I guess I was really grateful to have my parents who were sort of silent supporters, even though sometimes, the relationship at home might be a bit strained because of how stressed I was, but I think they really understood what I was going through, so that was really helpful. And of course, my friends, we always had a great time in school, even though I knew we were all I guess, equally pressured to live up to our expectations in terms of like getting good ATAR and like doing the UCAT and stuff. But I guess we were really able to be there for each other despite everything that was going on in our lives.
Yeah, and when you look back at year 12, do you have fond memories and was it a fun time or was it sort of lock in and just like get through this year and then enjoy things afterwards?
Yeah, I think if I were to reflect on it now, I think I definitely remember more of the fun and enjoyable things rather than, I guess, the difficult times. And even recently, I was talking to my parents about my experience in overall, I guess, year 12 time. Because I would like to believe that I didn't spend that much time like studying and like locking myself in my room. But my brother was like, no, you stayed in your room every single weekend and you locked yourself in there. So it kind of like depends. I think I just try and remember all the enjoyable moments, but there were definitely sacrifices that were made in the process.
Yeah, and when you look back, what was a normal day or study day for you? Do you think you were like locked in studying for long periods of time, or did you find some sort of balance and put some restrictions on how much you were studying?
Yeah, I don't actually know if I would say like I wouldn't say I studied a lot in terms of quantity. I was definitely a quality person. So when it came to like comparing like hours in terms of how much I studied with my friends as well, I didn't have a particular like amount to categorize that. But then I would say maybe typically, after school, because we are already really tired from classes and stuff. So I don't study too much after school, but then I focus a lot more on the weekends. And then I take the weekends to do a lot more tasks that are maybe more time consuming or a bit more important because I have better focus during the weekend.
Sure, and I think that's going to be a really interesting idea for lots of people who would probably just think, it's all about cram, cram, cram. So, could you share some of the ways that you studied and how you made your studying so efficient?
Sorry, could you repeat the last bit? I think you cut
Yeah,
out.
yeah, sure. Like, so how did you make your study more efficient given you weren't doing as much volume as other people?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to not sort of categorize your tasks in terms of like how long you take them, but more so like what sort of things you want to complete by the end of the day or the week. And like what I mean is like you could prioritize different tasks in the order that, whether your SACs are coming in first or what subjects coming first. So maybe, for example, if you have like a SAC for chemistry, like 2 weeks later, you might want to prioritize like revising actively by doing practice questions first rather than going through and rewriting notes, for example, because the task is quite soon. So that's sort of like a higher priority task I would do. But then if I had more time, then of course I can take that time to consolidate and like look at my notes from class and like that sort of stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so are you the things that are coming up in the next, let's say, 2 to 4 weeks, you're shifting to more practice questions, whereas things that are more on the horizon, that's when you're doing some level of like redoing notes and revising notes?
Yeah, so it's like a probably like a difference between like consolidation and like actively, I guess, applying the concepts that you've learned in class.
And how did you manage to, I guess, prioritize and organize that? Because a lot of people will just be focused on what's coming up in the next 2 to 4 weeks. How did you like also make sure that the long-term things were looked after?
Yeah, so I know it's like really hard in year 12 when you have so many subjects to deal with, but I think having a because I know schools give out like SAT calendars and assessment calendars, right? So being able to really make full use out of that. So not just seeing what's coming in the next 2 weeks, but also all the way until the end of the term really helps you like block out the time for what sort of things you want to do each day. And it sort of gives it a bit more purpose as to why you're doing those tasks as well.
That makes sense. So you've got some level of, acute preparation for the things that are coming up, some level of background information for the long-term things as well. And so you have that consolidative phase to make sure the information sticks. And then you have your sort of pre-SAC preparation phase, if that's right.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like a bit of like being able to manage what's going on in like the short term, but also not forgetting about what's coming up next in the long term as well.
And how did you deal with the times? I guess there's a couple of weeks where it just seems like everything happens at once and you have big clusters of sacks. Were you overwhelmed at times?
Yeah, for sure. I think anyone would have been overwhelmed with like 2 or 3 stacks all crammed into a week. But then again, I think that really emphasizes again the importance of knowing what to do first and prioritizing your tasks on your to-do list because of course we can't do everything all at once and it'll be really hard if we get to the very last minute and we're trying to figure out, oh, I only have X amount of days, but I have so many other things to do. And so being able to plan ahead is, I guess, really beneficial in terms of managing the stress that comes with multiple sacks in a week. It doesn't get rid completely of like the pressure that you feel, but I think it makes it a little bit easier on yourself.
Yeah. And when you think back to your time in year 11 and 12, is there anything that stands out as the most significant challenge you faced and how did you manage it?
Not necessarily in year 11. I know a lot of people say that the first year into VCE is quite different and challenging, but I found that transition quite okay. But I think the most significant obstacle I sort of faced was definitely in the middle of the year for year 12 when I had to take the UCAT, but then school was still going on at the same time. Because then it's like the challenge of I don't know what to take more seriously because they were both equally important to me. And I think there was a lot of things going on as well. And it was really hard to sort of like compartmentalize what my thoughts were in that situation.
And how did you sort of manage that? Because what happens for a lot of people is at the end of term two, they have a big sack week for the end of unit three, or all the assessments start to come up. And for some people, they have a bunch of exams or trial exams at the start of term three, and then the UCAT
Mhm.
is between those two things. So, how did you actually find that balance between knowing what was important and allocating your time?
Yeah, I mean, if we were to use the example that you brought up about having like UCAT in the middle of SATs and like trial exams, well, I think the dealing with the sacks that came before definitely relied on a lot of planning ahead. So going back on what I said earlier, because I know that if it's really close to the UCAT, then I don't want to be sort of focusing 2 weeks before the sack, sort of like two things at once, because that would be really difficult. And then when it came to the middle period with the UCAT, I think I knew how high the stakes were for the UCAT as well. So of course you can't do everything at once. So I told myself it was a little bit of a give and take situation. So for a set amount of time, maybe like a month and a bit before the UCAT, I prioritized that a lot more in terms of, you know, being able to still balance some of my schoolwork, but then UCAT was like the number one priority at the time. And then in terms of trial exams, right? Because trial exams, I didn't really take trial exams as the sole indicator of how well I was going to go on my final exams. I just thought of it as more of how can I take from this experience, like what I need to improve on. And so it wasn't that high of a pressure environment for me in terms of trial exams. So it wasn't really difficult dealing with UCAT and trial exams at the same time.
Yeah. And you talk about how you felt the UCAT was very high stakes. I guess what was your mindset going in as you sat it, if you can think back to this time last year?
Yeah, so I feel like a lot of people would say the same, but it almost felt like the UCAT was an all or nothing experience because it felt like it was the only way to get into medicine at that time, which I know is false now. But then when you're like overwhelmed with everything that's going on with the UCAT and you're like thinking about, oh, what sort of like cutoff score should I meet for the interview? It sort of gets into your head a lot and gets really overwhelming because it feels like if I don't do well, then I can't get into medicine. But that's like completely false.
And how did you stop yourself from like catastrophizing about that point? Because it can be a big confidence killer when people think, this is my only shot. If I stuff it up, I'm done. Like my hopes and dreams, like sort of ride on this exam. How did you
Mhm.
manage the pressure of that?
I feel like I had a lot of those self-doubt moments leading up to the UCAT, and it was definitely difficult to completely ignore it. But then I think the closer I got to the test date, the more I tried to distract myself from, I guess, meeting a certain score, but more so focusing on doing my best. Because I had a lot of conversations with my parents about it as well, because I think they understand that the pressure that I was feeling was more so from myself than like externally. So they were really trying to calm me down in terms of like not taking it as an end of the world experience if something goes wrong on the day.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think most people who are sitting the exam who end up doing well have some sort of way of relaxing that pressure and almost forgetting about the score and just backing the preparation that they've done and then almost being at peace with whatever happens given that preparation. So that's very interesting to hear. When did you actually start preparing for the UCAT?
Um, I guess in terms of like formal preparation, it was the start of year 12 in the summer holidays. So that's when I actually started looking at what type of questions I had to do, sort of how the test was built in terms of like different subsections and how I could like strategize, I guess, when answering the questions. And then, of course, leading up to the actual test, like a month before, that was when I started really grinding it out.
And were your scores always strong from the start, or were there particular things that you thought helped most with the scores?
I think a lot of people are surprised when I tell them this, but my scores were never good until like the week before the actual test. Like, I don't know if you remember from last year, but I didn't break 2000 until like a week and a half before my actual test date, which is kind of crazy, right? Because like leading up to it, I think that was also the biggest source of my worries. Like, I'm like, am I ever gonna make even close to the cutoff score that people are talking about, right? But then I guess with the progress that you get from taking the test and like practicing as well, it's not like exponential. So it's like when you try to learn like a certain skill, you get better over time as well. But with the UCAT, it doesn't really work that way. And I feel like that sort of makes a lot of people feel scared about the test and like how they're gonna do. But then again, you don't know what's gonna happen until the actual test.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because I think, if I remember correctly, the exam before your UCAT, I think you got around 2,200. And then, on your actual UCAT, you've outperformed that by 250 points. Um, is there anything that you would attribute that difference between your previous exam and your actual exam too?
I don't actually know why that difference came about. I think there definitely is a lot of things going on the actual test day because it's like a different environment. You're in like the feels of like test mode, and I guess the questions that pop up on the screen is something you can't ever anticipate, even though you've practiced a lot, right? Because you practice for the skills to answer the questions, but not necessarily to predict what sort of questions will come up. So I guess it really depends a lot on the day's setting and I guess what luck decides to give you on the day with the questions.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to flag because even with the way you're talking about it, it's you're prepared for things to come up that you don't expect. Whereas some people will say, I've done 20 mocks on metaphor entry, but then when something new comes up, when something that's longer than they expect or different to they expect comes up, they don't have that sort of flexibility to say, all right, this is new, like I need to, skip this or I need to approach it this way. And it's easy to get in panic mode or spend too much time on a question or lose some of the skills that you've worked on in practice. Whereas if you have your mindset of saying, the point of practice is actually to develop certain skills that may be useful in these contexts, but you actually don't know what's going to come up on exam day, and you can get new things and different things. But that's okay because you've got the skills from your practice to be able to manage those. I think that that's a good takeaway point for a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure.
And I guess when you're reflecting on how you balance those months of UCAT and ATAR, I mean, you've already talked about how you would have a different sort of style of preparing for short-term things versus long-term things. Is there anything that you feel like you did differently compared to other people in studying for the UCAT and ATAR that helped you do so well in both of them?
Mm, I'm not sure about for the UCAT at least. It wasn't necessarily like a completely different study approach, but a lot of it was about having a really strong mindset. So we did talk about earlier, like being able to like be flexible with the types of questions that you do, but also I guess like having a strong mentality as to like not give up too early. I think is a big one for me at least, especially when you don't see results immediately. I think that's when people tend to stop. But then I guess doing the UCAT and practicing over a long period of time really builds, I guess, a sense of like persistence and like having to keep going until the end, which is like your actual test day, essentially.
Yeah, and I think that'll be really reassuring to hear for a lot of people because particularly with, a month to go, people will be sort of getting the 2000, 2200 scores. That's where most people will be sitting. And most people don't see progress when they do their practice. But to know a story of someone like yourself who did very well on the actual test day and who didn't necessarily see the progress in practice, but things ended up working out well on exam day. It's hopefully will give people some confidence to hear that um, stories like yours exist.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like every time I tell people about it, they're like, really? And then I can like feel the sense of relief from them as well.
Yeah. And is there anything, I guess people, let's imagine that there's people who are sitting the exam this year who might have 2 or 4 weeks to go before their exam. Is there anything that you would suggest they do in preparation or suggest they do with regard to their mindset that you found helpful?
Yeah, so I think in terms of preparation, you also mentioned this to me last year, but when we do mocks, right, we sort of like enter this cycle of just like doing as many practice mocks as we can and hoping that our score goes up. But then a lot of time is missed out on, I guess, the reflection component of it. So like spending some time just reviewing the questions and sort of get a gauge of like what sort of questions you're weaker at, but also like why you made those mistakes was definitely a really beneficial thing I implemented into my routine 2 to 4 weeks out from the test day. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard thing because people will often cut down on their review time and think, I could be, doing more questions with this. But unfortunately, spamming mocks is probably not the most efficient way that people can actually improve, even though that seems like the most hard work way of preparing for the exam. And
Mhm.
it's worthwhile thinking about like the quality of reviewing after you've done, 2 hours of mocks and you're tired and you can't remember what happened in question 10 of VR versus a mini mock where, that just happened 15 minutes ago. So that's very interesting advice that you've given there. And then did you feel like doing well in the UCAT? How did that impact your confidence going into your end of year 12 exams?
I wouldn't necessarily say they impacted each other. I think I already set quite a high goal for myself at the start of the year in terms of like my end of year 12 exams. So regardless of my UCAT score, I think I would have been pretty much in the same position. But I think it definitely alleviated some of my stress in terms of getting an interview offer for some of the universities that I applied for. So I guess there was like one less thing to worry about.
And where did that ambition to set that high year 12 goal come from? Was it from teachers, past grades, parents?
I feel like it was mostly from me because I hold myself to a really high standard, and I think that was sort of how I was raised, and I guess that's just part of who I am. And so there wasn't really a reason as to why I set that goal. I think it was just for myself because I knew I could do it.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear. And I think for a lot of people, like they just don't set the bar high enough because you don't believe you're necessarily capable of, such amazing feats. I think if you were to ask a bunch of, year 10 students, do you think it's possible you can get 99.95? The vast majority would say no, and because they just don't have that belief. But it seems like that's something you've had from quite a young age with regard to how you were raised and what type of personality you have.
Yeah, and it's also like not necessarily about whether you think you can do it, but it's like there's no reason as to not set a high goal for yourself, right? Because the worst case is that even if you don't meet that really, really high goal, you'll still be able to come up with something that's fruitful. And so again, the sky's the limit. So I think I do set really high goals when it comes to what I do as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And I hope you continue to set those high goals for yourself in the future. Now, I've got to ask, there would have been three amazing days last year. Number one, when you got your amazing UCAT score. Number two, when you worked out that you got 99.95. And then number three, getting the offer for med. I guess, do you remember those moments and what was your reaction like?
Yeah, so out of the three that you mentioned, I think the one with the biggest reaction was my ATAR release day. Surprisingly, because I thought the biggest one would be when I got into medicine. But surprisingly, that was the most underwhelming one. So, because I remember, because ATAR releases like quite early in the morning as well. And I have this thing where I can't be the first one to look at the results. Like I get my mom to do it. So she was up at like 6:30 in the morning, ready at my desk with my laptop and everything. And she was like ready to log in to my account for the results and stuff. And I don't know, because it was so early in the morning, I was quite sleepy as well. And I remember everything just happened all at once. My principal called me. My mom was like calling some of her friends or something, and my like dad and my brother were like kind of confused what was happening, but I think they sort of got what was going on as well. But there's a lot of things going on that day. But yeah, it was a really good day. And then I went to school after that, saw my teachers and everything. And yeah, it was just a fever dream, honestly.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. That sounds so incredible. I'm very happy and that's a great story to tell as well. And as you mentioned, you were well deserving in getting the offer for med. What's med school been like so far? Is it what you expected, or is it something different?
Um, I feel like it's definitely a lot more different than I thought it would be. So in terms of like things that I knew were coming, well, we have like bigger cohorts, so there's a lot more people that you're looking at and like meeting through classes. And I guess in terms of the difference between high school and uni as well, you get less guidance and control from like teachers and stuff. So a lot of it is self-driven. But I was actually quite surprised by how everyone is like super social. Like everyone was super extroverted. They were all like making small talk with each other, and I was like, whoa, this is like everyone's like actually here to make like lots of friends. When I thought like I guess like the stereotype is that oh everyone's like super locked in and just like study driven. But no, they're all really fun people and I've met like a lot of fun people in med school, which is really nice.
Oh, wonderful. And did you find it was a hard transition to make from year 12 to uni, or do you find it's more enjoyable now that you don't have to study for SACs and grades?
I think I miss a lot of parts of high school. So like the more enjoyable bits of high school for sure. And I also enjoy a lot of the freedom that I get in uni. I feel like the transition itself wasn't that bad. I think I just didn't get used to how many people I had to meet every single day. Because we all have classes in like different groups as well. And that's like the only time you see them each week, right? And so if you don't make like an effort to contact them outside of class, like 2 weeks later, you're probably like, hello, stranger. Haven't seen you in a while, sort of situation. So yeah, that's sort of like the biggest difference I felt, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, everyone talks about it, but it's hard to actually appreciate until you experience it. But school, you see people every day, and it's you don't like have to put that much effort to be friendly with people because you just run into each other. You spend so much time with each other, and I'm sure you'll have this experience. Now in first and second year, it's like you still actually run into each other a bit, and then placement is a bit different when you're all at different hospitals, and then work is a bit different because you actually like have to put in like so much effort just to schedule, things to hang out. And then it's hard to come up with the same excuses. So that will be something that, yeah, is a new challenge going forward. But enjoy the days of when you're on site and you can actually see everyone and have fun because a lot of us look back on those first and second years and have our fondest memories there and all the events that go on is a lot of fun too.
Yeah,
And is
for
the way
sure.
you're studying, is that any different in uni compared to how it was in school?
Yeah, I feel like another thing that I sort of struggled with as well is thinking about how to study, which is kind of a weird question, right? It's like, why do I need to think about how to study when like the entire of like high school it's always been quite straightforward, like notes, practice questions, repeat, and everything. It's like I wouldn't necessarily say my approach changed because I know my strength is doing questions and learning from those questions. But then the only issue is that when you're in uni, the stuff that you're learning is a lot more in depth and broad. Like, for example, in VCE, they have like a study design, right? So everything you learn is like restricted to the study design, and you don't have the question of like, what should I know and what should I not know? But then in uni, it's sort of like, well, I could spend like a whole week on this topic and I wouldn't have learned like every single thing yet. So that's sort of when you start to like think about how can I stay like curious about stuff so I can like actually have motivation to keep learning it. Or otherwise I would just forget about it really quickly.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. There's so much depth of content, and you're learning basically for life rather than learning for the end of the year as well.
Yeah,
So it
exactly.
does require a bit of a change in approach, and you're going through things probably at a faster pace with regard to how much content they get done in a particular period of time as well. So yeah, it's one of those weird things that you go down certain rabbit holes of different ways to study and different apps and tools, and it's a lot of experimentation really that you have the time to do in those first couple of years.
Yeah, for sure. It's like we're all like testing out like different ways of taking notes, like or like the whole like Anki debate as well. It's like, is it good? Is it not good? Like the whole first semester has been sort of, like you said, an experiment to study.
Yeah, and that's the way it should be. I think if you stick to your same ways throughout, then you're missing an opportunity because uh, basically the complexity of what you need to know and how much time you have to learn that the complexity will go up, the time you have will go down, and so it's worthwhile figuring out what works best for you in these next few years too. And when you think back, I guess, to your initial year 11, year 12 times, if you imagine there'll be plenty of students who want to do med, are in that year 11, year 12. period and would ask someone like yourself, looking back on that journey, what pieces of advice would you give to those people?
The biggest piece of advice, I think, and one that I kept a lot in my mind was being able to know when you need to take a break. Because I feel like the biggest thing with year 12 students that are, I guess they have really high expectations for themselves, they don't seem to, I guess it feels weird to take a break, right? Because it's like, why am I spending this time resting when I couldn't be doing something else that's like more effective or efficient towards my studies? But then I like to think about it as sort of recuperating and recharging so you have more fuel to keep going, right? Because if we never take breaks, like our body's not a machine, right? We can't keep going forever. And so being able to understand that you need rest as well and making the most out of the breaks as well, I think is really important in year 12. And I don't think a lot of people emphasize on this point enough.
And that's a really good point that you raise, and it's good to hear that you've brought that up at, a relatively early stage as well, because I think from, everyone I know in med and beyond, like we're very bad at actually properly resting, actually finding ways to rest and recharge and not just do more studying or like rest by scrolling or watching TV or like eating extra food or whatever. Finding actual proper healthy ways to rest and restore yourself is a very challenging area for lots of people. So that's one thing that's people wouldn't expect you to bring up, but I think that's a great piece of advice for everyone. And so you've told us an incredible amount basically about your journey from year 11, year 12, sitting the UCAT, balancing the UCAT and the ATAR, and then going on to med school as well. I guess, is there any other part of your experience that you wanted to share, or any part that you feel like we haven't touched on that would be good to go over?
Um, I feel like a lot of things in my life sort of picked up in like this point of time. So like in year 11, year 12, I wouldn't say much happened before that. But maybe in terms of like the moment that sort of solidified when I wanted to go to med school was definitely when I did my work experience in year 10, right? So it was just at a normal GP clinic, but then it had like an inbuilt emergency care center next to it as well. And so I had a chat with a couple of the nurses there as well and the GPs that were working in the clinic, right? Because at that point I wasn't really sure as to whether I wanted to go into medicine. And then I remember I was like, I'm gonna take this experience to really understand sort of what goes on in this career and really, think about whether this is the one for me. And I think through all the experiences that I had over there as well, I think that really solidified my decision into going into medicine.
Oh, it's very interesting. I didn't know that. And what made you apply to the GP clinic in the first place?
There was no reason. They were just the only one that accepted me for work experience. So it was actually by luck. But I think I learned a lot of stuff from the whole experience as well.
Yeah, yes, that's definitely something for people who are a bit earlier in their journey to consider if they can get some work experience. I know lots of people have spoken very fondly about that. And then you've also talked about some really good strategies in year 11 and 12 as well. So, once again, thank you so much for sharing all of these insights about your journey and what it was like. And I'm sure that there are people who are going through a similar journey to yourself in year 11, 12, and even starting med school who watch this video and find it tremendously helpful. And once again, thank you so much for volunteering your time to share some of these experiences.
No worries. Thank you so much, Ethan.